Myths about the Vikings. Myth number 1. The Vikings wore helmets with horns. This must be the biggest myth about the Vikings. There are no records of such helmets having ever existed. All depictions of Viking helmets dating to the Viking Age show helmets with no horns, and the only authentic Viking helmet that has ever been found does not have them either. An explanation for the helmet with horns myth is that the Christians in contemporary Europe added the detail to make the Vikings look even more barbarian and pagan, with horns like Satan's on their head. It should be noted that the Norse god Thor wore a helmet with wings on it, which do look somewhat similar to horns. Myth number 2. The Vikings pillaged as their only way of living. It was actually only a very small percentage of Vikings that were warriors. The majority was farmers, craftsmen, and traders. For the Vikings who took to sea, pillaging were one among many goals of their expeditions. The Vikings settled peacefully in many places, such as Iceland and Greenland. As explorers, they crossed the Atlantic and reached America 500 years before Columbus. As international merchants of their time, they also peacefully traded with almost every country of the then known world. Myths number 3. The Vikings were unusually bloodthirsty and barbarian. The Viking raids were indeed very violent, but it was a violent age. And the question is whether non-Viking armies were any less bloodthirsty and barbarian. For instance, Charlemagne, who was the Vikings' contemporary Charlemagne, who was the Vikings' contemporary, virtually exterminated the whole people of Avars. At Verdun, he ordered the beheading of 4,500 Saxons. What really made the Vikings different was the fact that they seemed to take special care to destroy items of religious value and kill churchmen, which earned them quite a bit of hatred in a highly religious time. The Vikings probably enjoyed the reputation they had. People were so scared of them that they often fled from their cities instead of defending them when they saw a Viking ship coming near. Myth number 4. The Vikings were hated everywhere. One could imagine that the Vikings were hated everywhere because of their raids, but it seems that they were also respected by some. The French King Charles III, known as Charles the Simple, gave the Vikings the land that they had already settled on in France. And he even gave his daughter to the Viking chief Rollo. In return, the Vikings protected France against wilder Vikings. Also, in Constantinople, the Vikings were acknowledged for their strength, so much that the Vagrarian Guard of the Byzantine emperors in the 11th century was made up entirely of Swedish Vikings.
Hey Kelsey, will you read that sentence again?
Also, in Constantinople, the Vikings were acknowledged for their strength, so much that the Vagrarian Guard of the Byzantine emperors in the 11th century was made up entirely of Swedish Vikings. Myth number 5. the Vikings lived only in Scandinavia. The Vikings did originate from the Scandinavian countries, but over time they started settlements in many places, reaching as far as North Africa, Russia, Constantinople, and even North America. There are different theories about the motives driving the Vikings' expansion. The most common of which is that the Scandinavian population had outgrown the agricultural potential of their homeland. Another theory is that old trade routes of Western Europe and Eurasia experienced a decline in profitability when the Roman Empire fell in the 5th century, forcing the Vikings to open new trading routes in order to profit from international trade. Myth number 6. The Vikings used crude, unsophisticated weapons. Vikings are often shown with crude, unsophisticated weapons, such as clubs and crude axes. But the Vikings were actually skilled weaponsmiths. Using a method called pattern welding, the Vikings could make swords that were both extremely sharp and flexible. According to Viking sagas, one method of testing these weapons was to place the sword hilt first in a cold stream and float a hair down to it. If it cut the hair, it was considered a good sword. Myth number 7. Myth number 7. Vikings preferred weapon as a massive double axe. Vikings did use axes in battle. However, they were of a very different type than suggested in the modern popular culture. It should be remembered that no double-headed axe has ever been found from early medieval Europe. Viking axes were light and used single-handed. The most common weapons found on Viking sites are spears. Myth number 8. The Vikings were all dirty, wild-looking people. In many movies and cartoons, the Vikings are shown as dirty, wild-looking, savage men and women. But in reality, the Vikings were quite vain about their appearance. In fact, combs, tweezers, razors, and ear spoons are among some of the most frequent artifacts from Viking Age excavations. These same excavations have also shown that the Vikings made soap. In England, the Vikings living there even had a reputation for excessive cleanliness because of their custom of bathing once a week.
Kelsey, read that sentence again, please.
Viking Age excavations. Oh, the same excavations?
Mm-hmm.
These same excavations have also shown that Vikings made soap. In England, the Vikings living there even had a reputation for excessive cleanliness because of their custom of bathing once a week on Saturday. To this day, Saturday is referred to as washing day in the Scandinavian languages, though the original meaning is lost in modern speech in most cases. However, laug, L-A-U-G, does still mean bath or pool in Icelandic.